Hello.
Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Giles. And just like that, we are live, hopefully, across multiple platforms and multiple channels. And we hope people can see us. And if you're around, drop a comment in and say hello. So I'm going to introduce you to everybody, although probably everyone who's joining knows who you are. But of course, I'll give you a nice intro for people, and as people are joining, fanfare. Okay, so I did say to you about being a best-selling author, and you said I'm not a best-selling author.
Or no,
prize-winning, award-winning, and then you've got accolades on here, so it sounds almost like prize-winning. I don't know. Anyway, on your webpage, I'm going to summarize here. So during the 90s, Giles Kristian, lead singer of pop group Upside Down, okay, which is pretty amazing, and you played all sorts of cool places, and we're on the same bill as amazing artists like Take That and the Spice Girls and the Backstreet Boys and Eric Clapton, and all things that make me very jealous. And anyway, so we can talk about that a little bit. And then did other jobs, which I'm not going to bore everybody with, and ended up now being amazing best-selling author of Raven, Blood Eye, your first novel, and which then turned into a trilogy, Blood Eye, Sons of Thunder, Odin's Wolves. Wrote a couple of novels, The Bleeding Land and Brothers Fury, about the English Civil War, which I think you're waiting to write the third one, or maybe there's readers out there waiting for the third one.
That one.
Yeah, that's the one that suddenly is going to go huge. Then you also co-wrote a novel with the late, great Wilbur Smith called Golden Lion, which we could definitely have a quick chat about that as well, which is amazing, which, I'm sure opened lots of doors to you. And then more recently, you've done the Rise of Sigurd novels, which are more Viking novels with one of the characters from the Raven books. And then a reimagining of the Arthurian legends in Lancelot and Camelot, which I believe Lancelot is now in development as a TV series. None of this is making me jealous at all. And then finally, of course, as people can see behind you, you're just about to bring out your debut contemporary thriller, which is called Where Blood Runs Cold. So welcome, Giles, and I can see lots of people commenting. Can you see the comments as well, Giles?
Yeah, I've got them on the side of my screen. I can see them. Yeah.
So we can see people saying hello. Nice.
Not my turn.
Okay, so welcome everybody. Nice to see you all joining in, and drop questions in there, and we'll scroll through the questions every now and again, and I'll pick out some to answer. But I've got plenty of questions already for Giles, and I'm sure he's got a few questions for me as well. So we'll have a bit of a chat, and then we'll sort of skim through the questions and see which ones we can answer. So let's see.
I've got one for you before we start, Matthew.
Yeah, okay.
Where on earth does Harffy come from? That's a really unusual name.
Where on earth does Harffy come from? It's the enigma. I don't know, actually. Before the internet, well, I know where I'm from. I mean, I'm from Sussex, and I think my dad's dad was from London, but so the southeast of England. But when I was before the internet, when I was a kid, I was basically me and my family were the only Harffys that I knew. I didn't know anybody else. When the internet came along and suddenly things like Friends Reunited and then Facebook and stuff came, I started finding a few other Harffys around the world, but I don't really know where it's from. My thinking is that it's possibly Saxon. I've decided that it comes from the Saxon for harp.
How convenient.
And I was a harpist, in a past life, or some, great grandfather was actually a shope, singing in the halls of the Anglo-Saxon lords. That's where it comes from. That's what I should say in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I shouldn't say the rest of it. I should just say that's where it comes from. Nobody's going to know, are they? So
brilliant.
So, well, on that note, Kristian is your writing surname. I don't know if it's your real surname. I know you're half Norwegian. So is that your mother's side, your father's side?
Yes,
lived in Norway.
It's my writing. It's actually Kristian. That is actually my middle name. My actual family surname is Upton, but I've always used Kristian from way back from the pop days, actually. to sort of just have that step removed from sort of my family life. Back then, there were pretty crazy days back in the mid-90s, I have to tell you. So I always use Kristian, which is sort of ironic, since I write about dirty, filthy pagans. But there you go. Yes, and the Norwegian spelling of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I had a lot of time before I published my first book thinking about whether to use my real surname or a pen name. In the end, I decided that Harffy was unusual enough that it was memorable. So I thought I'll go with that. But the number of times that people ask how to spell it or can't spell it, and it's amazing. You know, I find it incredible when people read my name and then spell it back wrong. You know, after seeing it. You know, but that's just seems to be the way.
And are you a Matt or a Matthew always?
Well, I always introduce myself as Matthew. I call I would think of myself as a Matthew, but I've got used to being called Matt over the years. Okay. There was a weird thing about Matthew and Matt, is that I was living in England until the early 80s, and then I moved. My parents moved to work in Spain, and I moved with them to Spain, and I was in Spain until about I was about 30 for most of my late teens, and then up to about 30, I was living in Spain. So that's why I missed your band, because I wasn't around in the 90s in the UK, and when you were, obviously
you lucked out there, mate.
I don't know. I missed lots of stuff, but the weird thing is that until then, I was always called Matthew, and nobody ever called me Matt. Then I came back in 2001 to the UK, and have lived here ever since. And when I came back, everybody called me Matt, and it was as if sometime in the 90s, Matthew had just ceased to exist and had become Matt. And it's very common now to be called Matt. And I used to sort of say, "Oh no, I'm Matthew," and people would just always call me Matt. So I don't really care. But
it does feel like one of those names that you only get called Matthew if you've done something naughty.
Well, that's maybe that's why I'm normally called Matthew.
It definitely has that feel to it,
because I've normally done something naughty, I guess. But okay, right. So I'm going to ask you some questions that I've got. So I've given you the introduction. We talked about lots of different things there. I know people are interested. I know we want to talk about the book, but first, what about the TV series? What's the situation with that? And I'm of course interested too.
Yeah, well, this is for Lancelot. So yeah, as you know, this has been it's taken a long time to get even to this point, and I'm talking years. It's taken several years to get to the point we're at now, where we do have the producer who's been on board since the beginning. We have two writers, and we have the director, and we have the studio. So all those sort of pieces of the puzzle come on at different stages. Now we've got all those guys, and the pilot is and it's in development, and the pilot's being written, and that sort of stuff. Obviously still a great distance to go, but just to get here has been a battle, really. And I always think, people, it's one of the first questions people ask is, when's to any author, they say, when's your book going to be on TV? Or when's your book going to be made into a movie? And it's almost as though it's a given that that's going to happen.
I know.
And it's almost frustrating in a way, because you sort of think, no, the book is the thing. That's my creation. It's about the book. If something else happens, then that is unbelievable and amazing. But the book, please take that. But I know why they say it, because we all feel it. We all watch brilliant stuff on Netflix and Amazon, and we all would love a TV series or a movie.
It's basically a way of kind of injecting your story directly into people's brains, I think, if you get it onto TV, isn't it? Because once something's on TV or now streaming, I mean, it's just directly into people's homes. People are going to see it. So it becomes, I think it feels like you're going to get access to so many more people than just readers.
Yeah.
I say just readers. I mean, obviously readers are,
and obviously your story, it might not even be really that, that close to your original story by that point. And I'm fine with that as well, because these things are a collaboration. The book is my thing. I get to do whatever I want, for better or worse. Sometimes you might read your book back. Well, we don't ever read our books back, because by the time they're published, we stick to death with them. But you remember back and you think, oh, I could have done something different there. We stand and fall by what we put into the book. That's fine. But what's exciting about TV and film is the collaborative process of really talented people, clever people, great TV writers, the kind of writers that make you so desperate to watch the next episode that you know it's bedtime, you know you should go to bed, but you just say to your partner, let's have one more. Those kind of TV shows that are just so bingeable. And that takes massive skill. And I think as writers, we can all learn from TV writers about how they do that, how they get you to turn the next, how we get them to turn the next page or whatever. A director with a real vision for it, a director who's hopefully fallen in love with your book and just kind of sees it in how they want to portray that on screen stuff. So collaboration is fine. So if it changes from the book, it's only going to, it's not necessarily going to be for the better, but you hope it's going to be for the better.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying. All of that rings true. And I think it's not a surprise to me that both Bernard Cornwell and Lee Child both worked in TV before they wrote books. And those are two of the biggest thriller writers and historical fiction writers, two the genres that you're tackling and me as well. And I think like you're saying, to write great page turning thrillers and action based adventure stories, you can take so much from TV. And talking about the collaboration, there's a question here I've put up on the screen from Nathan saying, how much creative input are you having on the show? Will you have a say in the casting, which is always an interesting question?
Yeah, it's a fun one to play with ideas of casting, even when that sort of side of the process is miles away. Now we've not got to that point yet. With TV, you have a showrunner, and the showrunner is really the boss of. With film, the way I see it, with film, producers are more kind of the heads of how it's all going. But with TV, showrunner is really, really important, and they make a lot of the important decisions about, obviously with the director as well, but in terms of casting stuff. I am fortunately the producer who has picked up the rights to Lancelot. Is a really cool guy, and he was happy for me to be involved with him as a co-producer. So I feel incredibly lucky, because that's not always the case. Often, as you know, with these things, somebody comes along, snaps up the IP, pays you the option, and then it's like, see you later, thank you, be gone, lowly writer. We don't need you around here. Being precious about your book, and often I think the writer of the book is the last person people want around on set and all that sort of stuff. But assuming we move forward and it all goes smoothly, I should be able to sort of come and go on set and sort of I want my chair. I just want the canvas chair. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, if you want, a few other historical fiction authors to kill, I'm there. I did A-level theatre studies. I mean, I'm sure I can handle myself. On a.
Well, I'd love to be able to say to the kids, you're not going to school today. We're going on set. I think
going on set. Yeah. Gonna kill all the other writers. You should have a scene where you get all of the other writers involved, just kill them all.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so that's that. Yeah. And some of the others are at different sort of stages of that kind of process as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we've got some people very keen on this old thing as well. But that would be as a feature film, because it's very much, it just sort of works as a feature.
Yeah.
So
tell us a bit about Where Blood Runs Cold then, because obviously that's the thing that's coming out. That's the book that's coming out next week. Thriller of the month in the Times.
Oh, shucks.
Come on, tell us a bit about it. And what's the inspiration? Where did it come from? Why switch to a modern time frame now? And give us the sort of elevator pitch.
Yeah, I'm not very good at that, but I can tell you. I can tell you that the idea I had came to me in 2003 when I was on a cross-country ski trip in Norway. And my brother and I and some Norwegian friends went on a long ski touring trip, and we had building igloo to sleep in and then get up and go off again the next day and stuff. It was pretty hardcore for us anyway. The Norwegians were fine, but my brother and I, we struggled. But I remember having the thought at that point, what would it be like if we were out here and people were chasing us across this sort of barren kind of snowy landscape? And actually in my mind then, when I got back from that trip, I was thinking about a sort of a parent and child being out there and kind of being pushed to the limits of trying to survive out there, not only from the environment itself, but from the people who are chasing them. I was living in New York at the time. I started writing it. I wrote the first 40,000 words. Raven Blood Eye was on submission at the time, and it got picked up by Penguin Random House, and I'd sold the idea to them that it was a trilogy, which it really wasn't at that point.
Which we all do. I did the same.
I think I just heard the word trilogy. I thought that's cool. Yeah. And then they said, okay, what's the outline for the next 2 books? So I then had to just get really busy doing that, writing the outlines for the next 2 books. And so I forgot all about, well, I didn't forget it, but I put it away, put the thriller away, and that was it. And I obviously went on to write 11 historical novels. But then after Lancelot and Camelot, they were both really big emotional books for me to write. I wrote Lancelot whilst I was grieving the death of my father, and it was a very big, emotional, heavy book for me to write. A lot of words as well, 203,000 words. Then I wrote Camelot after that, another big one, 170,000, 180,000 words. And I poured a lot of myself into those 2 books. And I've got to be honest with you, after them, I was absolutely exhausted. I was creatively exhausted. I was emotionally drained from writing those books that I put my heart and soul into. And I thought, this is the time to just try something different. I need to refresh my creativity. I know Tony Ritchie's talked about it like your creativity is like a well, and you drain the well, and then after that, after you sort of finish your book, you have to wait for the water to rise again before you're ready to go again. And that's how I felt. I just felt completely creatively drained. But
I feel like that after every book, and I haven't even had the grieving and all the rest of it. I just absolutely, I get it's definitely the case that it's like a sponge or a well that, you wring it out, and then you.
Well, I often think, isn't it incredible that we're expected to just kind of churn out book after book after book? If you think about it, there's nothing that says that we ought to be able to do that. I mean, if you've got a story to tell, then fantastic. You write the book and you get the story done. But we are, as sort of, genre authors, expected to just keep coming out with the books one after another. And sometimes I sit down and think, what if there isn't another idea for another book for a couple of years or whatever? But you don't actually get the luxury. You just have to come up with another book and off you go. But this one was such a different prospect. It was going to be a thriller, so it was going to be about 70 to 90,000 words for a thriller. Which,
how long is it in the end?
This is 85,000 words. Right. For me, that's half a book.
Yeah, well, it's great. It's really interesting because I did something similar. I sort of balked at the idea of jumping genre completely, but I'd been writing the Bearbrand books, the Benicia Chronicles, and I think I was on book 6 or 7. I can't remember now, but it was a couple of years ago. I'm just writing book 9 now, but I was probably about 6 books in, and I just, like you, felt I need to do something different. I'm getting, it's getting repetitive. It's, I need to do something different. And so I ended up writing Wolf of Wessex, which is, and I think the more I think about it, I haven't read Where Blood Runs Cold because obviously I'm on the naughty list and I didn't get sent an arc to read, so, but anyway, so I haven't read it, but from the premise, it sounds quite similar storyline because Wolf of Wessex is an old warrior who picks up a teenage girl, your pre-teenage girl, and they rush through being chased through the forests and stuff. So, and again, it's that thriller length. And when I first handed it in, my editor said it's too short. You've got to add an extra. You've got to add some more. And he had some idea for a couple of extra chapters that I had to put in because I'd written alternating chapters from his and her perspectives. One chapter always became 2 chapters because I had to put one for him and one for her to not break that sequencing. But anyway, it's interesting, and it certainly works, to do that change of doing something a bit different, new characters and something.
I don't think that many readers are sort of aware of that certain genres, you're expected to write a certain amount of words for certain genres. So, obviously the historicals are much longer than a contemporary thriller, but fantasy is obviously longer than historical fiction.
Yeah.
But 85,000 words for this because you don't have to do the same level of world building at all in a contemporary book. It's just not important. It's not expected. It's frankly not wanted. A thriller reader
they're in Norway
to be pulled through the story. Yeah. There's not the room you don't have the luxury of. I write sort of quite lyrically. So Lancelot and Camelot are very lyrical books, long sort of flowing sentences, very, very highly descriptive. You can't do that in a thriller either. So for me, it was really interesting. And that was part of the thrill of writing this book for me, was to test myself in a different way, to try something I'd never done before, to write in a slightly different style, to pare down my normal style, and see if it would work. Also with this, there was only mainly two characters, and it was about, the challenge was kind of keeping that momentum going with just two characters, and also a lack of kind of different sets, really. You know, if it was a film, it's just mainly just the snow, the mountains, and the woods. So that's another challenge, was trying to keep, when you don't have the different the different sort of places to set the story. And so it was a great challenge, and it's exactly what I needed. It was fresh. I felt like I was starting again from a career standpoint, and it's something I hadn't done before. You know, my other books, I'd done Raven, Blood Eye, which is a coming of age story. I did the Civil War thing, where you have brothers on opposite sides, and very much as a family story, a family divided by the English Civil War. I did some more Viking books, obviously with the Sigurd series, which is just guys going around. It's like a cowboy film, but revenge sort of thing. Then Lancelot was coming of age, but obviously high romance angle with his relationship with Guinevere and his love for Arthur and stuff. And then Camelot was very much a kind of legacy thing about his father, about being the son of Lancelot. So I tackled all these themes in my historical books, and I actually thought, I can't go straight into another historical book, because all I would be doing is recycling one of these themes. Whereas this is a completely new theme for me as a writer.
I totally hear you, and I'm just reaching a point. So I said I was finishing book 9 now. It's the last book of my current contract with Head of Zeus, and so I'm sort of thinking, do I write something? Do I just write the next? I've got 2 series on the go, so I've got a book coming out. I should plug it while I'm here, because you've got Where Blood Runs Cold behind you. I haven't got the whole poster up behind me, but The Night of Flames is the sequel. Look at that. It's a Viking one. Funnily enough, set in Norway, like your Where Blood Runs Cold. So, and unlike you, I haven't ever been to Norway. But anyway, this is the sequel. This is the longest book I've ever written. This is 160,000. This is my chunky book. But so do I write the next one of that series, the Time for Swords series, or do I write the next Bearbrand book, because there's a couple more probably to write in that series? I'm book 9, so or do I write a sequel to Wolf of Wessex, which people have often asked for, but I kind of like the fact that it's a standalone and I don't need to go there again, even though I think it might be nice. But then I've always wanted to write a Western, and I'm thinking, is now the time right for me just to write a Western, in the same way that you've written a thriller? It's just to write something different, although Western, of course, then you've got the historical fiction element of it, and I have to do all the research of the 19th century America and all that stuff.
I know a lot of people that would love a Western. I don't know why you don't see them around, but there are so many of us that would actually love a good Western. But a lot of what we're doing is Western.
I'm just writing Westerns with swords now. That's basically what I do.
Wolf of Wessex is a Western.
Yeah. And I don't think you've written you've not read A Time for Swords, have you? But A Time for Swords is it's a monk. It's written by a monk who becomes a warrior, Hunlaf. But it's set at the dawn of the Viking Age, so it's Lindisfarne. He's there at the Battle of Lindisfarne when Lindisfarne is attacked by the Vikings. He survives, obviously, but then he hears that there's going to be another attack on another monastery further down the coast, and he brings together a motley crew of perhaps 7 warriors that end up defending against this horde of Vikings that are coming. So again, it's just samurai. It's 7 samurai.
It sounds magnificent. Yeah,
it is. Yes, it's my working title for it was The Magnificent Monks. I was writing it, but I thought I can't call it
that title.
Yeah,
everyone loves alliteration.
Yeah, well, obviously I do. That's another rod from my own back.
Well, funny enough, I hadn't read Wolf of Wessex because I have a kind of an old misanthrope in my new book, which is the one I'm writing now, which is the third in my Arthurian tales. And I was worried if I didn't want to read yours until I'd really got into that. So I was now far enough into that story that I could then read your book. And as it happens, we're fine. It's all good.
there's so much overlap in all these books anyway. I mean, it's like, I'm sure, people can say, well, that character's a bit like, Black Floki or whatever, or like, the different characters from each of our books, I'm sure would overlap, and people be able to see parallels because we're writing similar adventure stories at the end of the day. Like you say, it's difficult not to end up going over ground that's already been trodden before, either by us or other writers.
Yeah, well, I think that's in general terms. Part of me wishes that publishing would just stop for 2 years. Nobody bring out a book for 2 years, and let's all just go and read some of the amazing, incredible books that are out there that we're never going to have
ours.
Yeah, of course. That we're never going to have time to read in our lifetime. We've all got books on our shelves that we've still not got round to, but actually that we would really like to read. And yet they just keep coming out, book after book after book. There are no new ideas. I think everyone should just stop for a bit. Let's catch up.
I mean, there are no ideas. There are no new ideas, but also there are infinite number of ways of telling them. It's like songs. We both singers of different levels of success in our singing careers. But I sang in bands as well, as you know, and but in music, how many notes are there? There's 8 notes or something, and that's it. But there's infinite number of songs. So I think it's the same with books, isn't it? And stories. You can tell a story in a million ways, and I think people actually like the fact that the stories are recognizable as well. So obviously my nod to Seven Samurai and the Magnificent Seven was very obvious, and I acknowledge that at the end of the book, because it's clear, it was. But even if you do it unintentionally or intentionally, but less obviously, I think people are quite happy to read something that they feel they know, they feel safe, they feel like it's something that they've maybe read before or understand the structure. And I think probably I haven't read Where Blood Runs Cold, but I'm sure there are certain things that a thriller has to have to make it work that you've done that probably Lee Child has done and many other.
Well, the thing is, I wouldn't know though, because I'm sort of completely experimental. I just write the way I want to write it, and I don't know if I'm following any sort of rules of thriller writing. I wouldn't know. I've read a few Jack Reacher novels, and
that's all you need. That's all you need.
Yeah, I've not really. It's not. I'm not actually a voracious reader at all.
Well, me neither.
I don't read that many novels. I listen to quite a few audiobooks, but I always feel. I know it's anathema to not. I always hear every person who talks about writing always says,
"You have to read loads.
To be a great writer, you've got to read novels." And it's like, well, maybe that's true, but that's not the way I've been doing it. Because for me, I want to create. That's what turns me on, is creating. And if I'm reading a book, I'm thinking, spending all this time reading, I could be writing. And I've always been like that. So yeah, I do listen to audiobooks because I can do that at the same time as I'm doing something else. But I don't actually spend a lot of time reading. So I've no idea what you're supposed to do with a thriller. I just wrote this book the way it felt right to me.
Well, I'm sure that's part of the joy of writing and of reading, is that you don't know what you're going to get. But I think that the fact that you haven't sort of studied how to write the perfect thriller and then tried to emulate it, I'm sure it keeps it fresh. But I'm sure you'll have done a great job, because obviously all your books are page turners. So I'm sure just moving it into a modern day setting and making it a smaller cast of characters and more direct and driven. That's basically it, right? That's the thriller there.
Well, that's basically it. And it's interesting because I've heard publishers say that in the old days, readers used to follow authors into whatever genre they went into, but nowadays it seems that people read certain genres and don't.
I was going to ask you about your name and whether you've had any problems keeping your same pen name.
Yeah,
for the two genres.
It was suggested that I should use a pseudonym for this book, and I just didn't want to do it. I didn't see why I should. I think that it's obvious to look. Once you pick up the cover, you turn it around, you're going to know that it's a contemporary story. It's not like I'm trying to fool anybody by not changing my name. And as far as I can see, the only thing that would happen is that book would have a different name on it. None of my readers who've read any of my other books would know that I had a book out.
Yeah.
So like, I'd be cutting off all of those readers who might pick it up and try it because it's me.
Yeah, we totally agree. I agree totally. When I've mentioned about doing this Western, it was almost like, well, you're not going to write that under your historical fiction name, are you? And I'm thinking, well, why not? It's just a different time of history. I don't understand why Westerns is a specific genre and not just historical fiction, because Vikings isn't a genre. Dark Ages isn't a genre. Roman isn't a genre. If I went and wrote a Roman book now, people wouldn't say it's a genre jump. They just say you're just writing a different time period. But if you write a Western, which is 19th century, suddenly it's a jump. But if you write a book set in the First World War, suddenly it's historical fiction again.
Sure.
I don't understand.
I think personally, I think it's the publisher's job to sell. No, I'm not saying they have to buy the book that we want to write. They might, and that's perfectly within their rights to say, you know what, we're not going to publish that. We don't want to buy it. But if they do buy the book, I think it's their job then to market it to the audience that they want to sell it to, and to make it obvious from the cover design what it is. And that's their, in a way, in the nicest possible way, that's their problem. You know, I'm going to write a great story. There you go. Here's a great story. But it's me that's written it, so I'm not going to use a different name.
I totally agree, and I think, well, we know I'm sure we both know different writers who've had to write under a pseudonym, different when they've moved genre, and it hasn't gone well because you have to create a whole new following, and it's so difficult to create a following. I mean, it's like, you know, to get to the point that you've got people following your novels, and then to get rid of that by just changing your name and call yourself something completely different that nobody knows is just ludicrous, unless they're going to spend huge amounts of money.
I might be wrong, but I don't think Neil Gaiman changed his name for all the different stuff he does.
No, and Bernard Cornwell. Bernard Cornwell has written modern thrillers and stuff, you know, set in the Dark Ages and stuff set in the high medieval period, and of course the Sharp novels in the 19th century. They're all under Bernard Cornwell. Maybe he's written stuff under a different name. I don't know, but not that I'm aware of, anyway.
Yeah.
So there's changing tack a bit.
Sure.
I know we kind of, I think I probably interrupted you before you finished telling us all about Where Blood Runs Cold, but I think people have got the gist of it.
Yeah. It's a snowy thriller. Job done.
It's a snowy thriller. It's great. Go and buy it. It's out next week. And then when you finish that, you can get a Night of Flames if you want more Norwegian escapades, but in this set in the beginning of the Viking Age. So finish Where Blood Runs Cold. This is out on the 3rd of March. So you've got a week to read Where Blood Runs Cold. Then you can pick up mine. Perfect. And we'll both be happy. But there's a question that's popped up. And I think we were talking about this before we came online. So did you get any qualifications at school? And I write, and I was crap at school. I love writing. So do you want to take that first?
Johnny, I wasn't great at school. I found school very difficult in many ways. I struggled to concentrate. I think now they'd probably say I had ADHD. I was kept down a year at school for sort of just being confused, dazed and confused most of the time, being out of my chair, distracting other kids while we were in lessons. So I was kept down a year and had to repeat it. And I used to have to go off and do the extra lessons, the extra sort of English lessons, which was kind of nice. And I liked it because it made me different. So the teacher, you know, the support teacher would come in and then take me out, and I'd have to go up into another classroom, and there'd be like 3 kids or 4 kids or whatever doing something different. And I'm glad I didn't feel a stigma about it. I actually thought, this is nice.
Lucky, really.
It's nice being in a small class with just the 3 of us and just sort of doing something different from everyone else. I've always liked being different from everyone else. But yeah, I didn't find it easy at school. I didn't read a book for pleasure until I was, I think, 14, and I had glandular fever, and I was off school for several weeks. Mum bought me a book because I was bored out of my brain, and she bought me a novel called The Crystal Shard by R.A. Salvatore, and it was sort of had an elf and a barbarian, and a dwarf.
That's Dungeons and Dragons, isn't it?
Yeah, very much, you know, and that was the first book I read for pleasure, and it was just, it blew my mind. And that was it. So it's just funny how things happen. Without having caught glandular fever from snogging the wrong girl at the school disco, I probably wouldn't be right.
So rock and roll.
It's great.
So it's funny. So, you know, you struggled at school a bit. I did really well at school academically until I hit sort of secondary school, which I think is typical of many people. I found there's this switch over in the UK when you get to like 11. You go from sort of primary school to sort of big school, and you know, little kid stuff I was easy for me. I found it fine, but jumping into the bigger school, I started getting bullied by people and stuff, and I think you hit puberty and whatever, and just got interested in girls and playing Dungeons and Dragons, which I was massively into, but I didn't do very well at school, and I struggled with exams, and just it might be of interest to anyone watching this. As I write historical fiction now, I failed GCSE or O-level history, and then I went on to do A-levels in theatre studies, which I just scraped to pass, English and art, and I passed art so I passed art and theatre studies, just scraped passes, and I failed. I got an unclassified in English literature because I couldn't be bothered to read all the books because they were boring. So I liked some of the books I liked, and I liked the Shakespeare, and I liked some bits and pieces, but when it got to who was it? Jane Austen, I think Mansfield Park.
Gosh,
and
Mill on the Floss and all those.
Thomas Hardy. Honestly, the most boring stuff. I know as I was 17, 18, and I just wasn't interested. I just couldn't. It was like, you can go out with your friends, go and get off with girls. You can go and play computer games or play Dungeons and Dragons, do something exciting, sing in a band, do anything, or you can sit down and read these books. And
boring books, yeah. Same with me. They were always really big books, really, really boring. And for me to have to sit down and read a book at that age, a book like that, was torture. I couldn't. I physically couldn't do it. So we all went and got York Notes, didn't we? All those exam guide books, and that's where we basically based our exam questions on.
I remember in the GCSE, in the A-level English literature, that you were allowed to take notes in, like that you'd handwritten notes of a certain length, I don't know, a certain amount of notes that you could take into the exam, into one of the final exams for this thing, 2-year studying, to get to this point. And I'd done nothing. I'd done no notes or anything. And I remember asking a girl before, like an hour before the exam, can I copy your notes? Because they had to be handwritten. They had to be your own notes. You couldn't photocopy them or anything. And she said, yeah, that's fine. And so she let me stuff. And I was like, oh, thanks. And I copied all this stuff out, scribbled it really quickly. Literally just before the exam, she snatched them away from me, just ripped them all up and threw them away. I said, you can't take my notes. Who do you think you are? So I went into the exam with no notes and then failed, obviously.
That might be why you failed then.
Could be. Well, it could be more to the fact that I didn't actually study at all, and then I had to rely on someone else's notes. But hey.
But I don't know, Matthew, because I feel that you seem to find this whole process quite easy. Like, as I was saying, for me, writing is difficult because I struggle to concentrate for long periods of time, which is obviously it's part of the course. If you're going to write a novel, you have to sit there, you have to concentrate until your brain starts to smoke, and that's just part of the process for me. And I find that very difficult. But you seem to sort of just kind of breeze through these books.
Well, that's maybe that's how it feels to you. You're not here. It doesn't feel like a breeze to me. But I think I can write quite quickly. I did work. So basically, I finished school. I didn't really do much. I didn't go to university. I ended up teaching English as a foreign language in Spain. I said before I was in Spain. So I came over, did my A-levels in the UK, and then went back to Spain. So all the 90s I was in Spain. I was teaching English as a foreign language to kids first and mainly to adults. And during that process, I ended up working in the Natural History Museum in their research department, in the geology department especially, helping some of the research scientists there get their English up to scratch, or even proofreading and helping them sort of massage the language in their articles that they were publishing. And after a while of this, I got quite interested in it all, and I decided I should do a degree. And so I did an Open University degree, and I started thinking, and bearing in mind I'd studied theatre studies, art and English, which I'd failed at A-level. So what do I want to study? Geology. I was going, okay. So I'd done no sciences since I was like 14 or something. So I had to do like a foundation course in sciences at the Open University to be able to do a degree then in geology. But after the first year, which I passed the first year, and but it was a struggle because I had to learn all of the sciences up to sort of A-level in a year. But I passed that, and then I decided, with a bit of suggestion from my wife, that she said, well, you spend all day on the computer playing games and doing stuff on the computer. Why don't you study computing? There's probably more future in that for you, and you actually enjoy it. So I then transitioned to sort of just the rest of the degree was all in computing. So I ended up getting a degree in computing and IT. But that then took me into a computing and IT workplace. I ended up working as a technical author. So technical authors write manuals for how to use software in my case, and so I think that was a good grounding in just writing and the whole process of having to get words out. You've got to finish in 3 months because the software's going live, so there's no messing about. You got a deadline, you don't miss the deadline. So if you have to work until midnight to get the thing done, you have to get the thing done, and it's going to be out, it's going to be online, it's going to be live or whatever. So you can't have spelling mistakes, you can't have, you've got to really focus and get it all done. So that was a great grounding for me. So when I transitioned into writing full time, I find the actual process of writing, I guess, isn't difficult. But for me, I think very much like we were talking about just now, the difficulty for me is finding the ideas. I think the ideas are hard to come by. The writing is easy. The plots are difficult. That's my feeling anyway.
Well, we all do things a slightly different way. Can I ask again, when you're writing, do you edit as you go, or do you get it all down and then edit afterwards?
So yeah, I was going to ask you actually a bit about just sort of your process and everything. So, but yeah, I'll tell you mine if you show me yours. So the what I do is I try to write 2,000 words a day. Once I've got so I do a bit of planning first, and I try to I scope it out almost at a chapter level, but I know that's going to change. But I sort of have the beginning and most of the I come up with like a few lines for each sort of chapter, sort of know where it's going. That changes a lot, but yeah, that's sort of a very high level process. And then when I'm writing, I try to write 2,000 words a day. What I do is I read what I wrote the day before first. Edit that as sort of a light edit. I leave gaps where there's like historical data that I need details of, like what type of grass was growing in Norway in the 7th century or whatever. And then I move on and try and write the next 2,000 words. Sometimes it's 1,500, sometimes it's 2,500, sometimes it's 3,000, sometimes it's 1,000. If I write less than 1,000, I feel a bit like, ugh, I'm really not. This isn't good enough. I plan. I've got a timeline that I'm trying to hit, so I can then deliver at the end. At the end of that process, I then go and fill in all those gaps, which takes a week or two, doing a bit more detailed research, which I've just done for this new book that I'm writing now, Forest of Foes. And at that point, once I filled in all those gaps, honestly, the Bernicia Chronicles are all alliteration. You'll notice that the new ones, A Time for Swords and A Night of Flames, they're not alliterative, because I wanted to not have to be alliterative, because it's becoming very difficult to think of titles that sound good, make some sort of sense about the story, and they alliterate, but I can't stop now, so I'm stuck. And the original title for Wolf of Wessex wasn't alliterative, but it suddenly changed to Wolf of Wessex right at the end when I discovered that there was the wolf, whatever I call them, the wolf unit or whatever of the Anglo-Saxon Wolf Brigade or something. I can't remember, but basically he's basically Dunstan is the old wolf, and it's in Wessex, so it seemed like this makes perfect sense. But originally it was going to be called Dark Frontier, because I decided I wanted to write a dark age western, and it was actually Robin Young said to me, because we were at an event together, and I said I want to write this western, this sort of like, so it's sort of frontier in the west, but it's in the Anglo-Saxon Dark Ages. He said, we'll just call it Dark Frontier, and I thought that sounds like a great title. Actually, I'll use it. But publishers weren't so excited by it. So.
I like that. It sounds a little bit sci-fi as well, though.
Yeah, it's sort of maybe it could be the title of like a series or something. I think, But anyway, once I finished filling the gaps. And at the stage I'm at now, I've then got what I call basically my first sort of proper draft, and I then print out the book on paper, because I can't do sort of proper edits just on the computer screen. I find that even today, when I was like preparing a document to print the thing out, I was seeing loads of typos and things that I thought, I've already read this a couple of times. Why are there typos? I don't, because I haven't gone back and read things as I go. So the stuff that I wrote at the beginning was written sort of in October. I haven't read that since October, so it's going to be interesting now. So I print it all out. I do a proper read through, edit on paper. That takes another couple of weeks, and then I put those changes into the book. Maybe there's a few structural edits there, and then I send it off to my editor, get more edits from him, put them in, and that's it. Well, then there's copy edits and proofreading.
Oh yeah, that's just one of the There's so many levels.
Yeah. So what about you? What's your sort of day-to-day process?
Yeah, well, every book has been slightly different. So Lancelot, I had to because it was I was breaking into a new kind of area, so I had to plan that quite thoroughly to get the deal, really, to sort of pitch it. So I wrote quite a few. I don't know how many words it was, but quite a big document, which was an outline, a chapter plan. And I ended up, there was far too much in there, and I ended up sort of having every sort of chapter plan broken down on a big whiteboard that I have in my office. And then kind of, I got my wife in one day and said, look, there's just too much here. I'm kind of, I've already written, this 60,000 words, and I've got all this to go. Just looking at it completely cold, which of those elements of the story do you think are not that important? And we literally just rub them out. So that was my most planned out novel that I'd ever written.
And that was Lancelot, was it? Did you say?
That was Lancelot, yeah. And when I started with Raven Blood Eye, I think I was pretty much making it up as I went along, which was tremendous fun. That was fun doing it that way. Now I just don't think I could get away with it. And Camelot was it was planned out, but not so extensively, because my publisher, by that point, they kind of trusted that I had a plan and let me get on with it. But I do find that I do have to pitch, I have to really pitch and sell the idea to the publisher, even after all these books.
That's interesting. That's interesting, because I haven't had to do that so much recently. But I feel that when I mentioned the dreaded W word, the Western, I feel like that is going to take some serious pitching to get them to agree to it. The rest of it is like, another one of the Benicia Chronicles, that's fine. And they don't ask for a synopsis or anything now. So I mean, I'm for the Benicia Chronicles one, so I'm sort of left. Then they suddenly come to me and say, "So what's the title of book 9? We need to put it in the catalogue, and we need to go out to whatever marketing we're doing, whatever." And I'm like, shit, I don't know. And then you have to write. And they say, "What's the blurb? What's the blurb?" Yeah. And actually, I mean, this is a funny story. Funny for other people, maybe not for me, but for the book Night of Flames, out on the 3rd of March. For that one, the reason it's so big is because it's basically feels like 2 books in one. I've kind of written 2 stories. I could have. It's all part of the same story, but I could have easily written it so that it finished earlier.
You've made a big mistake.
But I made a big mistake, because they came to me. I hadn't finished writing the book. I was like halfway through. They came to me and said, "What's the synopsis, so we can put the blurb out on the Amazon page and on their marketing and all this, and what's the title?" And so we came up with all that. I gave it all to them, and it included the whole story as is. And then when I was writing, I'm thinking, shit, I'm like 80,000 words in, and I think I was like 70,000 words in, and they haven't even got to Norway.
Right.
And the whole story is like, and they're in Norway. So I'm like, I can't then make it like 100,000 words. Like, they get to Norway and that's it. So you effectively got a lot of story before they get to Norway. Hopefully it's exciting. I think it's exciting. The early reviews have been good, but it's become, it becomes a bit of a real saga, them getting there, So I did a lot of research, and I know you've done the stuff on Viking ships and everything. So I haven't actually been on the Viking ships, but I watched loads of documentaries, and I was reading loads of stuff about that, and watching, finding esoteric videos on YouTube of people, doing those things. And so I've got loads of that. I tried to put loads of that into it. And of course, their whole saga of them getting to Norway involves all of that. And it's that fun of trying to have all of the research in there without it looking like you're just dumping loads of research and trying to make it an exciting story. So, which I think,
talking of the Viking ships, when I went to Norway to row the largest replica Viking ship built in modern times,
I'm not at all jealous of that either.
No, it was tremendous fun. But it was when we got onto this little island of Karmoy, and we were kind of walking over this hill to come down to the bay where the ship was moored, and there was a little campfire and just some Vikings lounging around, as there are,
obviously.
Fire was going, a guy there in a blue tunic and big bushy beard, and it was like, Rob, it was the late great Rob Lowe, just happened to be sitting there by a fire with a few mates and his sword, Cabbage Bane, which was the best name for any sword ever. And there he was. So we jumped on the ship and had a photo together, which is something I cherish now.
So the only time I met Rob Lowe was at a Christmas, I think it was a Christmas lunch. It was a lunch in Bath 2 or 3 years ago, just before just before the lockdowns, really. Ben Kane had organised this lunch for a few writers who live near Bath, and he'd come from wherever he was living to this thing, and Ben cancelled that morning and just said, "Oh, can you sort of," to me, he said, he contacted me and said, "Can you just sort of go to the restaurant, make sure everyone's okay, and this is the table booking and blah blah blah." So I'm sort of there. So when he arrives, Rob Lowe, this is, and says, "Where's Ben?" And I was like, "He's not coming." He's like, "Oh, fucking," he was swearing. But all I remember is it was great fun. And then at the end of the meal, he left early, and probably because Ben wasn't there, and he was thinking, "What the hell? I've just come all this way, and Ben's not even here." But when he left, and bearing in mind I've never met the guy before, he gave me a kiss. So I just remember that. And then sadly, about a year two later, heard he'd passed away. It was very sad.
Yeah, no, a wonderful guy and an incredibly gifted writer. I remember one day he turned up at my door, which is something that people don't really do generally without kind of calling you. And he just turned up at my door and gave me a bottle of whiskey and a sword. It was just so bizarre, but brilliant. Yeah, wonderful guy.
So
we've got loads of questions coming in.
We've got loads of questions. I'm just thinking, I'm just going to scroll down, see some.
I don't know how you're supposed to multitask.
Yeah, I'm trying to. There was one along here. Wait a minute. Somebody asked something about whether we get sort of imposter syndrome. I can't remember. I can't find the question now. Oh yeah, here you go. Do you ever doubt yourself? So it's another one from Johnny. Do you ever doubt yourself and your ability? Do you feel like you're sometimes winging it? Well, I think yes, definitely.
You're always winging it. That's part of that's. I mean, I know Johnny's an actor, and that's part of the thing. It's like you don't go to an audition and say you can't. When it's an audition for horse riding, you don't say you can't horse ride. You say, yeah, I can horse ride, and you kind of you get on the horse in the audition and you live or die. That's just. I think that's sort of what we do, isn't it? You have to. I think there's a certain amount of arrogance involved in what we do, because what we're actually doing here is spending all our time on our own, writing away, thinking that at the end of the process, people are going to pay good hard-earned money in a shop to buy the thing that we've created. I think that takes a lot of balls to actually assume that that's going to happen. And so I think you have to have that confidence. Otherwise, you'd never write a word if you didn't have that kind of confidence to think, this people are going to buy this book. You would be just a bundle of nerves, and that would be no good for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before we came online about, and we've talked a bit about our studies and our childhood and struggling there, and talking of confidence, and it sort of ties it in with the historical research and telling a tale as well and everything. Just one of the anecdote I mentioned to you before about when I was studying A-level English that I failed. Talking of confidence of writers, I met another late great writer, Rosemary Sutcliffe. That I don't know if people on here have heard of her, read her books, but she passed away quite a long time ago now. I met her, so she passed away in 92. I'm just looking at a Wikipedia page, and I met her. It must have been 1989 or something. So she was, she's very elderly then, but she was wheelchair bound and had been since the age of about 14 or 15 or something, and she was very severely disabled by an unusual form of it's called Still's disease, which I was just reading here, about juvenile arthritis. But totally, she had very crippled hands, difficulty in using her hands and stuff, and she was wheelchair bound, and she managed to write books about the Arthurian legends and about, the Eagle of the Ninth, which I think the film Centurion is based on.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah.
And so she's written all of these action-based historical fiction things, and just to have the I was going to say the balls, but to have that confidence of being able to just say, I'm going to tell a story set in places that obviously in the past where I've never been there, but in lands I've never been to, doing things that I've never can imagine doing. I can imagine doing, but I could never physically do them myself. So much like you and I, we can actually go and pick up a sword and swing it around, or throw an axe, or try and row a Viking ship, or ride a horse, or we can do all these things. She couldn't do any of those things. And so being able to imagine them so well and bring them to life, and just to have that confidence, I'm sure she also suffered from imposter syndrome. I'm sure she questioned why people would read her books, but she was a great inspiration. I didn't think about the fact that I'd met her until years later, but thinking of the fact that she'd been able to do all of this and be so successful without ever having been able to enact or visit many of the places that she was writing about.
That's interesting, because a lot of writers I know won't write about a battlefield unless they've trodden the battlefield and walked there with their own 2 feet. And I kind of glibly call that a failure of the imagination, because I know that I wouldn't get away with saying to my wife, I'm off on the research trip this weekend and off for another research trip next weekend. I wouldn't get away with it, but I also wouldn't want to. And I think that it's I sort of take umbrage with this kind of idea that, you if you've not been there, you can't write about it. Because look, I write about shield walls and people stabbing each other in the throat.
Yes, exactly.
I haven't done that, and nobody seems to say, oh, you shouldn't write that because you've not done it yourself. So I think there is a kind of an element of sort of one-upmanship about sort of the research that writers do. And I think sometimes it's a bit of a writerly excuse to sort of say, right, I'm off. See you later, losers. I'm gonna go and I'm gonna breathe in the air and stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. You learn some stuff from actually being there. The Viking ship, for example, the smell of it, just the smell of everything was covered in this thick, sticky pine resin. The ropes, the mast, the benches, everything was just really tacky, and it had this sort of wonderfully heady aroma. And something like that gives you something, because you think, actually, in those days, you would know if somebody walked into your village, you would know if they'd just come off a boat, because they'd smell of this kind of the tar from the ship, and those kind of sensory things are, I think, really, really important. And I do think if you stand on a battlefield and you kind of get it in your mind and you kind of play it out, I think, if you can research those things, I think it can add something to your books. But do you have to research everything? No. That's what our whole thing, our whole gig is imagination.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of a story. So I can see you said that Johnny is an actor, and he's saying that it's the same with acting, just use your imagination. But I remember the great story, I don't know if it's apocryphal, of I think it's when they're filming Marathon Man, Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier. And I think Dustin Hoffman, obviously famously a method actor, and one of the scenes he's supposed to be really out of breath and stuff, so he would go out and he'd run around the block, get back, he's all sweating and everything, and they had to do multiple takes, and by the end of it he was almost dying, and Laurence Olivier just said, you could just try acting, old boy. I just think, well, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, we're going to get nowhere if we don't have the imagination to begin with.
So I'm going to scroll through some more questions here. Yeah. What else we got here? So Sharon Bennett Connolly keeps on asking about us singing. Yeah, maybe we only do that live. I think we only do that if we're actually in person. That's an in-person kind of thing, I think.
And if we've drunk a little bit more.
And we have to have a drink. Well, talking of drinks, we both need to try out our whiskey that we promised we were going to drink. I've been drinking beer. I don't know what you're drinking, but...
I'm drinking a Blanton's at the moment, which is delicious.
So have you actually started drinking it?
Yes, I have been, mate, while you've been gassing away. I've got to do something while you're going.
Oh, okay. Like that, is it? Mm-hmm.
Gosh, there's quite a lot of questions.
So any that jump out? Do you want to...
Well, I was going to start at the beginning, but that's miles back, isn't it?
People saying all sorts of nice things.
Yeah, that's right.
Mark Orridge says, got my degree in archaeology last year at 57. Well done.
Now, archaeology is something I would, if it ever comes on the TV, anything to do with archaeology, I am all over it. Love it. Time Team was my favorite program. I just loved it.
Yeah. I think they've now crowdsourced something, and they're going to do some more Time Team stuff. I think they've got a Patreon, and they're going to do some new productions.
I hope so.
Have a look afterwards. I think they have. So comment here from Rob says, hi both, you're both brilliant at historical world building. What a lovely thing to say. How could I not choose this comment? Can you recommend any tips? So go on then, you can recommend tips while I open my bottle of whiskey, because I'm going to try to celebrate my success of writing my new draft.
That looks lovely. Yeah, you need to. Every part of the publishing process should be celebrated, I think.
Absolutely.
So, tips for world building. I don't know. I think going back to the sensory thing, for me, I like to no, it's basic sort of probably school level storytelling, but what can you hear, what can you smell, what can you see, what can you feel, all the kind of sensory stuff, I think, is I'm not sure if that's exactly world building, but it really resonates with the reader. If you sort of like this book, I got to mention coffee, which is, the first time I've ever been able to mention coffee in a book. If you talk about the smell of freshly ground coffee, the reader goes, "Oh yeah, I can smell that." And if you're engaging their senses, they're in. You've got them, No, but that's probably not world building, is it? I don't really know how I never do talks about how to do what I do, because I don't know how to do it. I just do what I do, and I don't know how to explain it to anyone else. Honestly, don't.
So one of the things I was thinking, so I've got so the tip, it's not exactly world building, but I suppose it sort of links into that, and because I'm just gone through this phase of filling in details. So when I write, I try to write as quickly as I can, and I think that helps keep the pace of the novel up. So trying not to get bogged down in too much history, although you have to do your research first. And I think there's a difference in some of the style of writing that I've done in the Benicia Chronicles is a bit different to what you've done, Giles, in your Sigurd books, where I think yours are a bit more tangential to actual history. So they're in a historical place, but they're not necessarily linked into real historical events as directly. When you link it into historical events closely, you've got to kind of do that research first. You've got to know where those tentpole events are and what's going to happen so that your story can thread in with those. But then in terms of actually building the world and making it realistic and feel real, I think it's the little details, like you were saying about sense of smell and taste and all those things. I think the sense is really important, but it's the details, the little details, which I think actually elevate the writing to make it more immersive. So what I do is when I'm writing, I try to incorporate real life things that I've lived as much as possible. So if I'm walking the dog and I step in a puddle or something, I'll try and put that into the book somehow. So those sort of just little everyday events, add a depth to it. But in terms of this sort of historical build of the world, I'll leave these gaps and then I'll go back and research them afterwards. But maybe it would take me half an hour or two to find out, what type of food they're eating in a hall in the 9th century or something. And it might only be 2 words in the you don't need to overdo it with the amount of research you do, but those little snippets actually add a whole level of veracity to it. So I've just spent a week investigating tiny little things, and it is all those tiny little things. It's like, what fruit was grown at this month in this place in this year, what tree is indigenous to that land in that time, because loads of things like that, animals and flora and fauna, getting that accurate is an art form in itself, and that takes a lot of research. But I just think all those little details layered into the story, you don't have to do a lot of it. They can be small brushstrokes, but they can really elevate the whole thing. So that would be my kind of tip.
I noticed in Wolf of Wessex you did a scene where the dog upsets a horse rider, and I thought that's happened on one of your walks.
Yeah, almost certainly. I can't remember the specific moment, but
and he said something like, "You're the one." He blamed the horse. Dunstan blamed the horse rider, saying, "You're riding your horse, so you're the one who's in control. I'm not riding my dog." So
I bet that did happen.
That's just something that's happened to you on one of your walks, and you thought, "I'm putting that in the book."
I probably wanted to say that. I was too scared to say it. Dunstan's not scared to say that. Oh gosh, that's one of the funniest things for me, is that I think we write so much, and you've written 13 novels now, something
12.
12. So I think I'm on my sort of 12th novel now as well. So about the same number of novels. I've written so many books that I can't remember the details of things like that. So you tell me that, I literally can't remember that scene at all. I can't remember writing it. And I find that quite a weird thing as well.
I don't know about you. I find that with the audiobooks. So when I listened back to Camelot because of the book that I'm writing now, and I thought, rather than sit and read it all, I'll just listen to the audiobook. And there were whole passages where I couldn't remember writing it at all, and I was sort of quite smugly impressed with it, sort of thinking, wow, where on earth did that come from? Like, where did it come from? Because in my sort of most lucid sense, I wouldn't come up with it now, you know. But in that moment, in that sort of that day, that hour, I came out with this thing, which I probably wouldn't be able to repeat, you know. And that's kind of part of the magic of it.
I think it's when you surprise yourself. Well, I said before, I write, and then the next day I review what I wrote the day before. And doing that, there's quite often going back to sort of the imposter syndrome thing. Quite often I go in after a day of writing, because I write now. I've got my own writing room, which I'm in now. So I go back into the house from the writing room, and I say to my wife, you know, oh God, this book's terrible. I can't, you know, it's rubbish. It's a real struggle, you know, and I really believe it, and I feel it, but I don't really believe it now. I tell myself that this is just, you know, this is just now. Tomorrow will be a different day. Just get over it. And I've written enough that I know that that's just a transitory sort of feeling. But the next day when I read it, I actually think, it's not bad. And I think if you can read it and think, actually, it's not bad, then probably then someone else is going to like it as well.
Yeah, it only gets better. It only gets better the more you go through the process as well. So for me, I don't edit my books really as such. I always add to them. I never really take much away, but always add and add.
Yeah, it's adding those layers. I think that's the world building. I think whether it's building the characters to make them deeper, or building little details of the descriptions to make them more lyrical or deeper. I think it's just creating the world that you want to create. I mean, I think your writing is more lyrical than mine, and I think it's those sort of layers that make you unique in the way that you picture a world. And that's interesting as well, because I could, you know, other people have written Lancelot, and you know, other people have written about Lancelot and about the Arthurian tales, and about how every writer writes in a totally unique way. So just an interesting comment here from Mark. Last dig before lockdown was at the Viking winter camp at Repton, and that Time Team is definitely back, and it's on YouTube, supported by Patreon. I wonder
if the Viking winter camp, is that anything to do with Professor Steve Harding? Because I think he was involved in that, and he was the guy that got me involved in rowing the Viking ship over in Norway.
There you go. It's everything will be connected in the end. Okay, there's a long question here, which I'm just going to highlight and see what it says, so you can read it too. With historical, I think it's been cropped actually. It's so long, it's been cropped. With historical world building, going back to your comment about writing about things never done, using your imagination, I'm finding my writing involves so much more research. So I'm in Australia, I may never get to the UK. I am writing, I'm going to just read what she's written, because I can't read it there. I'm writing about 8th century UK, and so many things I find I need to know and remind myself. Seasons different, birds, plants, the whole landscape in general. You're both inspiring. Well, thanks for calling us inspiring. But it is that research about I mean, even though we both live in the UK and England now, we write about places nearby or in Norway, where I know we've said Giles has been, and obviously the seasons are the same, maybe more extreme, but the same seasons. But looking back at, like, you know, what animals and plants and stuff were alive in the time of the books. I mean, you can't just take it for granted.
No, you can't. You can't just. You're obviously the same as me. I can't just mention a bird without knowing if that bird would have been seen in sub-Roman Britain, in that part of the country at that time of the year. And it's just for one sort of sentence that the reader is just going to go past without even thinking about it. But it might take me an hour to find out the answer to that.
Absolutely, yeah. And I just spent yesterday, I did what I call my natural history pass. Of the novel. So I use, every time I mention a tree or something when I'm writing the first draft, I just put a different shape brackets around the natural history stuff. So trees and birds and animals. And then at the end, I go through all my books. I've got lots of books behind me. And I just have to, you know, pick up all the natural history books and sort of checking, you know, when do you hear the birds singing, and when do you know, which types of birds and stuff. So it's Kat Jarman's team, apparently.
Right. Okay. Yeah, River Kings. That was her book, wasn't it?
Yeah. So Sigurd Allenson. So he's been drinking his mead, and he's a bit squiffy.
Good man. Oh, look at that! That's his question there. Who would win in a fight between Beerbrand and Sigurd?
Oh gosh,
that's going to be.
They'd probably just go for a drink, wouldn't they?
That's awkward. That's awkward.
I think the answer is that if there was ever a book where in these worlds, it's like people have said to me before, who would win between Bearbrand and Uhtred? And I said, well, obviously, if I was writing the novel, then Bearbrand would win. If Bernard Cornwell was writing, then Uhtred would win. And it's the same with Sigurd and Bearbrand, because really, I think these are all archetypal pinnacle warriors. These are the guys at the top of their game. These are the Rafa Nadals and the Djokovic's. Who's going to win? These guys are level pegging. They're both, at the top of the game. It's going to come down to luck or something or some. I said the other day when somebody asked me this, I actually said, well, I think Uhtred would win because I think he's a sneaky cheat, whereas I don't think Bearbrand is a sneaky.
Right.
Bearbrand is more direct. I think he just goes in and relies on his strength and his skill.
Yeah.
Whereas Uhtred's always sneaky. So I think he will kind of do something. He's clever. Whereas maybe Bearbrand's not as clever. He's just an oaf. He goes around fighting. Also, John Upton, is there any relation?
Well, possibly, yeah, because my cousin's called John Upton.
Concerning the Viking books, as being half Norwegian, does the Nordic language come out naturally? Okay, here we go. I'm posting here. Does the Nordic language come out naturally, or is research necessary? I need to Google quite often whilst reading.
Yeah, I play a bit fast and loose with that. I sort of, sometimes I use the Norse version of the word or the Norse spelling of the word, and sometimes I don't. And there's really no rhyme or reason. For me, so much of my writing comes down to how the lyrical flow of the prose. So I'll use the word that feels the nicest in my mouth as I'm reading it through. So and also, if I think it's a particularly interesting word, or if there's something about that word where we might be able to see that it's kind of lent itself to the English language, for example. And there are so many Norse words that we now use every day. And yeah, I have a really cool book where I look them up as well, John. I have to look up a lot of stuff. But no, being Norwegian hasn't really helped me because it is really a different language now. And I ask my mum sometimes, and she doesn't really know that much about old
Norse.
Old Norse. In fact, though, bless her, I did get her to start translating Snorri Sturluson when I was a lot younger, and she did actually start doing that for me, which was amazing. But I just use whichever word feels the best in the moment.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually spoke to a Professor Philip Lavender for the Night of Flames about the Norse, the Old Norse. So he's a professor in Old Norse. He lives in Sweden. I didn't realize when I started speaking to him, but I think he lives and works in Sweden. But yeah, he's a specialist in Old Norse that somebody put me in contact with. So I was asking him for questions about, I wanted to name certain characters, to come up with names for people and that were based on what they would their role in the story without giving it all away. Anyway, and I sort of said, what can I call this character? And it's interesting because obviously I can just look up, Google Old Norse words for whatever, and I'm not gonna find. In the end, after a lot of discussion, he gave me really good ideas for things. And
well, I'm writing a Viking video game at the moment. So I'm the narrative designer on a game called Norse, and it's all a Viking village, and it's kind of a strategy game. And coming up with different names for all the characters is really hard because there are only so many Viking names. You can't have too many Svens, or otherwise people are going to get confused. But fortunately, with Viking names, you can use the by names, which are the nicknames that they had, and that just gives you a whole world to play with. You don't want to overdo it, but like there was a Viking nickname, Stinkfart, for example, and it's like, okay, because
he's got to be someone.
He's got to use that.
So there was someone like me back in the Viking Age. It's amazing.
Well, that's the beauty of it. Is actually when you think about that, you just realize that nothing's changed. We're just guys, just like us, mate. Almost.
Exactly. Yeah. So Tracy Stone has just mentioned that the word that I was struggling to find before was alphas, which is true. And I was talking about the warriors being alphas, yeah. But yeah, there's a question here from Sigurd. What does he say? Oh, this is to me. Just the other day I was on another live thing, and he asked about. Oh, he mentioned about a Frankish axe, and I mentioned I was talking. I was talking about the book that I'm writing is set in Francia, and he mentioned about Frankish axes, and I totally missed out the fact that I hadn't included them in the book at all. So you'll be pleased to know, Sigurd, that I actually did manage to include some Frankish axes in the finale of the book. So there's how the inspiration comes. Somebody says, "What about Frankish axe?" And then you write in the next chapter, and you go, "Right, this is how he's going to kill the guy." So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, it doesn't actually kill it with the Frankish axe, but it's another spoiler. Anyway, there's a Frankish axe that the Frank in it uses. He asked another question here. This is for you. Are we going to see?
Yeah. Are we going to see more adventures of Sigurd now that Gorm is dead? P.S. I changed my name by default after your character. That's really very cool, isn't it? I would love to write another sort of Sigurd book. I don't know. So I left them all in Constantinople, and I always felt that I didn't want to leave them there forever because they would just get soft, living a life of luxury and sort of hot baths and the corruption of the Eastern Roman Empire. And I thought at some point I need to get them back to the dark northern waters. But I don't know if it's been too long now. The thing about when you're doing this as a career, you just have to think about who's going to buy it. And so I've toyed with this a lot because people ask me if I'm going to write another Raven book as well. And that's been even longer since Raven. And I think as much fun as it would be, would I be cutting off a massive chunk of the market because the only people that book would appeal to are people that have already read those other 3 books? Whereas if I write another Viking book, which is a completely standalone Viking book, which I'd like to do, and I've got a plan for one, it would be, hopefully the people that read Sigurd would read it because it's me writing a Viking book, but also you don't have to have read those other books, so it's open to absolutely everybody.
It's really interesting because everybody, when I started writing, everybody said, well, I say everybody in the industry, kind of the thing was, trying to write long series of books. That's what people want, and that's what publishers want and everything. And so that's where I've gone with Bearbrand. He's on the 9th book now, and I've probably got another 2 or 3 books in the story that I can kind of at very high level imagine. But to be honest, I think although they're selling well, I don't think they sell as well as The Wolf of Wessex or A Time for Swords or new things that come along, because the new things that come along snatch a wider audience of like a new audience. And I think possibly when people see that there's 9 books in a series, they think, oh, I don't want to pick up this book.
It's the rule of diminishing returns with series, sadly. Yeah. And you can understand it in a way because, first of all, as you're saying, you have to have read the others for it to be appealing to you. But also, in terms of PR for it, it's not a new thing. It's part of the series. And nobody's like, oh, it's just part of the series he's been writing. So unless it's the Bernard Cornwell book, and even those, let's be honest, that a lot of people feel that the Uhtred thing perhaps went on a bit too long. And that's it, and that's the king, So I think, personally, it's really interesting to do something fresh and new, even if it's got similar themes.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you, and I'm sort of, all this is going around in my mind. I mean, I've still got to write really another 2 or 3 books now to finish off at least 2, I think, to finish off the Bearbrand series, because where I've left him, and I don't think I could just leave him in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of funny. You've read all these books, and
actually, for any writers out there, this is a really important point to make. I think I don't know how you left the last one, but so I get so much stick from how I left the English Civil War series. Not my choice, I have to say. It didn't sell. It wasn't selling as well as my Viking books, so the publisher, essentially decided to drop the series. But over the years, people have kind of caught up with those books, and now there's tons of people out there that have read those 2 books. And I would love to write another one, a 3rd one in that series. But I think if you do write a series, you have to make sure that every book closes and it's not you don't leave it on a cliffhanger, for example, which is easy to do if you think you're going to write the next one.
Yeah, I tend to I totally agree with you, and I try not to leave really big cliffhangers at the end of every novel. Every novel I try to make it a standalone.
Yeah.
So it's a bit. I know Jack Reacher, the Jack Reacher novels, Lee Child does it very well because they're thrillers based on an individual story each time. So although it's the same character, and sometimes he harks back to previous adventures and things and characters, each book is totally standalone. I mean, you could pick it up and read it out of order; it doesn't matter. So mine they're not quite as standalone as that because there are threads of stories because it's based on real history. So you've got real historical characters, kings and queens and bishops and people they've got ongoing longer stories, but the main premise of each story is a specific battle or an adventure or something, very much like the Uhtred stories or the Sharp stories, I guess, where it's based around a specific event or a created event, made up event. But I do try to have a beginning, a middle, and an end to the main story arcs because I'm very aware that I might not get to write another one, or I might, whatever happens. I don't want to leave them completely out on a limb. I have to say the last two, so the one I'm writing now and the previous one, have both ended with like a small cliffhanger, but it's definitely a small cliffhanger. And I was talking to my agent, or not my agent, sorry, I haven't got an agent now, to my editor the other day about it, and he was sort of saying it feels like the previous book and this book and maybe the next one are part of like a mini trilogy within the series, like they're all interlinked. So you've got these sort of mini cliffhangers to sort of string those three together, but you can still read them as standalones, definitely. So yeah, I think it's important what you said about making sure that they've given a satisfying ending. So question here that I don't know who it's aimed at, maybe both of us. Why Vikings? Why not Britons? Is it a romantic notion?
Well, for me, being half Norwegian was why I sort of started with the Vikings. I spent a lot of time in Norway, in and around the fjords on little boats, and imagining Vikings sort of heading off out of the fjords to raid and pillage across the sea, and thinking, oh, wouldn't that be good? To go back to that time when you could do stuff like that and get away with it. I think,
that's it. You're cancelled.
Yeah.
I apologise, everybody.
Well, that's it would have been, wouldn't it, if you didn't have those sort of moralistic kind of burdens. Come on.
I don't know if I'd actually wanted to go off raiding, but yeah, I get your point.
You get my point.
I get your point.
Yeah, and I used to sort of imagine that stuff all the time, and so it did make sense for me that my first books would be about a Viking crew. It was when I was at my brother's stag do in Oslo, and we went to the Viking ship museum just outside Oslo. And for anyone who's been there, the two most beautiful, the Oseberg ship and the Godstad ship, just sitting there, and you can go up and touch them. Well, you can't. You shouldn't go up and touch them, but you do, obviously. And just to see them there, and when we were on this stag do, which is quite a cultural thing to do on a stag do, you've got to admit. And I was just sort of imagining each of us who were on the stag do in the rowing benches of this Viking ship, and thinking, that's kind of what they were doing is what we're doing now. It's just with perhaps a bit more murder, and
a bit more chance of death. Yeah,
a bit slightly higher chance of death, possibly. And so for me, it was always going to be Vikings. But of course, I have done Britons because I've done Arthur and Lancelot, and they are kind of the archetypal sort of British legend. It doesn't get more British than that.
In my defense, I would say I've only so far written 2 Viking novels. So Time for Swords was the first one that had Vikings in. So all of my books have been set in the 7th century, which is before the Vikings came to Britain. So I write very much about Anglo-Saxons and their confrontations with the native Britons. So the Welsh, really. The natives of the land, and the Picts and the Irish and everybody else. But so, yeah, I look at the Anglo-Saxons as kind of proto-Vikings. I mean, they worship the same gods, just with different names. And they were pirates that came over to Britain and settled. And then a couple of hundred years later, the Vikings came over and did the same to them when they'd sort of become a bit soft and Christianized. They came over, they were all worshipping Woden and everything. They got Christianized and soft, and then the Vikings said, "Hang on a minute, let's do the same thing again," and then they did it just the same. Yeah. And then the Normans came. So I mean, it's just every few hundred years.
Which is why we're such a wonderful melting pot, isn't it? We're just sort of so diverse.
Crazy. More questions. I'm scrolling down through here.
Peggy votes yes on another Raven and Sigurd. Well, Peggy, if you say so, I shall have a word with my publisher.
So, Mick Rooney, what's he say here? Yeah, hello.
Question.
Hello, Mick. Would either of you fancy writing about Roman Britain, either from the point of view of the invaders or the conquered? Well, over to you.
Well, first. The thing is, there are so many great authors doing it already. You've got Ben Kane, Harry Sidebottom, Anthony Ritchie's. You've just got, Simon Turner. You've got so many, Douglas Jackson. You've got so many writers writing great Roman novels. Jaron Jones,
and even those guys, many of them are now moving into different periods and different, side tangential genres and things because
it was flooded.
They've done so much. Yeah,
I think that market, the Roman market, was flooded. It was sustained for such a long time, but I think it did get to the point where there are too many of them.
Yeah. And I think everything's cyclical. I mean, but it's become a little bit of the Western. I think that one of the reasons that the Westerns are kind of shunned or looked down on, at least in the UK, is I think they were just saturated probably in the 50s and 60s, 70s, whatever. And then, it just became, that's been done to death. I think maybe the from the historical fiction perspective, it feels like Roman novels, maybe that's kind of where they've gone as well, and probably Vikings are getting there now as well because of all the TV series and the Viking TV series and the Last Kingdom and things. I think that sort of genre, the genre that we've written in up to now, I think is probably hopefully we're okay. We've got our readership, but I think it's difficult now to be original. I think.
The point here about from the point of view of the invaders or the conquered, the Manda Scott with her series and Boudica. And I think that's really, really interesting. I would like to, I've always liked the idea of writing about that first contact moment. I think that would be very, very cool. But, there are other brilliant writers in that field. So I think I'd leave them to it.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I feel the same way. I feel like it's a period that I'm interested in, but I feel like there's so many people in that. It's just a very crowded place to go.
And now we've got the likes of Simon Turney and Angus Donald doing Vikings.
Exactly. So, well, this is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying. There's when I started writing The Serpent Sword, I didn't want to write Vikings because there was already Vikings being written about. I didn't want to write Roman and it kind of just fell into my lap, the idea, and I started writing it. But I realized that when I started writing it, nobody was writing really about 7th century Anglo-Saxons. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I found a real niche. This is really cool. And then just when my agent at the time started taking the book out to sell in the London Book Fair, there was a launch at the London Book Fair for a book set at exactly the same time, called Edwin, and it was about the King Edwin of Northumbria, by Eduardo Albert, and it was the first part of the Northumbrian Thrones trilogy, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, "What the heck?" I've just come up I'd come up with this idea which I thought was unique, and then somebody else is just doing it at exactly the same time. And I know he felt the same way. I mean, because I've not met him face to face, but we've talked, via social media and stuff, and I know that he saw my books appearing on Twitter and stuff, and he was like, "What the heck? Some other guy is writing the same stuff as me." And
so that happened with me and Bernard Cornwell with his Uhtred series. I was living in America. I came back to London for a trip, and his the first one, was it The Last Kingdom? Was the first
Last Kingdom, yeah,
was on the bookshelves in the Waterstones that I went in, and I felt physically sick.
I tell you. That's funny. Well, I hadn't
got my deal. My manuscript was on submission, and it was my agent at the time was an agent called Writers House in New York, and they were obviously made aware of the Bernard Cornwell book, and so I had to write a whole piece on how my character differed from how Raven differed from Uhtred. So I kind of wrote this whole thing about what made Raven different from Uhtred, and eventually persuaded them that the book was different enough to sort of take on. And but that feeling of feeling sick because you just think I've missed my chance. Yeah.
So I had it with Bernard Cornwell too, because I started writing The Serpent Sword in 2001. And I was 26,000 words in when The Last Kingdom came out. And The Last Kingdom starts with a young man in Bebbanburg. My book starts with Bearbrand at Bebbanburg. And I literally, like you say, just felt sick. And I stopped writing. I didn't write for 7 years or 6 years after that. I thought, there's no point. It's been done now. That everyone's going to think I've copied him.
Yeah.
And I was so gutted. And I just didn't do it. I put it away till, I think it was 2012. I ended up picking up. So it's probably like 7 or 8 years. Until it was 2013, actually, I think, and E.L. James had self-published her 50 Shades of Grey book, and it was making bazillions of dollars, And I thought, hang on a minute, maybe I should just write this thing and self-publish. I'd realised at that point, I thought, well, come on, there's loads of books about spies. James Bond is one. It's not like you can't write another spy thriller.
Yeah.
So why can't I write another book set in Bebbanburg and stuff? But of course, all the number of times that people say basically you're just copying Bernard Cornwell. And I know that I was inspired by Bernard Cornwell's Arthurian novels to write, but the genre, the specific time and place that I chose to write was nothing to do with Uhtred, because I started writing it before he did. Before he brought the book out. You might have started writing it, but I didn't know about that. And so it's an interesting world. And it's interesting how those sort of serendipities happen, and when multiple people write the same thing at the same time. And
what would you say to, because obviously the writing itself is difficult enough, but the actual business of writing, the sort of the work that goes into being a sort of a one-man business is quite enormous, isn't it? And it's really, really hard work. And what would you say to anybody who's listening now who has aspirations to become a full-time writer or to write novels? And what would you tell them about the kind of work that's involved beyond actually just writing the story?
Oh, that's a good question, and I think people are surprised at how much work is involved. I think people think that if you get a publishing deal, that's it, and you don't have to do anything. Yeah. And they think there's a big difference between being self-published and being published. And I've been both. So I self-published my first 2 books. And then I got picked up by a publisher. So I'm now working within the traditional publishing industry, and I sold those originally self-published books into the traditional publisher. So now they've done both things. So I think that maybe I spend a little bit less time on self-promotion now, but not a huge amount less. I think so you have to spend a lot of time on social media. I think social media is your friend. You have to be active on social media to be seen. There's a huge sea of books in the same genre, and if you go outside of the genre, there's the massive ocean of books, and to get your name and your book and your cover in front of people so they can actually have a chance to buy it or to even hear of it, is hugely difficult. And I think people think that the publishers do a huge amount of marketing, and it's true that they do help in they set up a blog tour or whatever, and they do the cover designs, and they do the editing, and they upload the book to places, and they get it printed, and they get it distributed. So they do lots of the background work that as a self-published writer you have to do. So that stuff I don't have to do now. Somebody else does that. But in terms of actually the social media, like this, this thing now, talking to you, helping you promote yourself and your book, and me promoting my book and myself, that's organized by me contacting you directly and talking to you and just organizing it. So it's all time that you have to put in. And I know you're active on Facebook and Twitter, and I am too. And so I think there's the misconception that everything will happen for you if you get a publishing deal, and that really isn't the case. And I think for huge writers like Lee Child, when they get to that point, or Stephen King, or whoever else, J.K. Rowling or whatever, yes, there's a huge juggernaut of marketing and stuff behind those people. It's ironic, really, because there doesn't really need to be, because they're going to sell anyway. But the people that really need to get promoted don't get promoted.
No, but of course, once the publisher has spent that much on acquiring the novel from a writer like that, it's cost them millions to buy the rights. So they have to then sell so many copies to earn out again. So then they have to invest so much into the marketing of those books to just to get the sheer scale of everything. And there's a phrase in the publishing business, a bit, what is it? Big advanced, small career or something. Because some people boast. Well, nobody boasts about their advance, but the idea of getting a massive advance for your first book, you might not want a massive advance for your first book, because if the publisher doesn't then earn that money back, they have to earn all that money back that they pay you to write that first book, and obviously more besides. And if they don't earn the money back for that advance, you're not going to write a second book.
I think so. I would say for in the modern world now, in the days of Kindle and all the other self-publishing options that are out there, that I think an aspiring writer nowadays is much better off organizing or trying to negotiate a small advance and a much bigger percentage of sales on sales of per unit than trying to get a huge advance for that very reason. Because I think if you end up in partnership with your publisher, so that they're doing lots of the background work, but you're getting much bigger percentage of each sale, but they're not having to outlay a huge amount of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds or whatever, on acquiring the rights to the novel. It's easier for them to make money back, and it's easier for you to make money regularly from sales. So it's always going to be a balance, but that would be my take on it.
Yeah. Look, I think you're right. It's so hard to actually get those sales. When you think about traditional sort of bookshops now, Waterstones, whatever, and our book might be at the back of the store, spine on.
Or not even in the store, in my case.
Or not even in the store. Amongst thousands and thousands of books, what's the chance that somebody's going to it's not going to be an impulse buy in that situation. No. It's going to be somebody who's gone in specifically to find our book. They're not going to just browse all those and then just pick that one off. What's the chances of that happening? It's so hard to sell a lot of books. I think you're right. People might presume that once you're published, that's it. Off you go.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I don't know what the percentages are for you, but for me, definitely about 85% of my sales are ebooks. So that's right. The bulk of my income comes from ebook sales, which it wasn't even a thing 20 years ago. So I wouldn't have had a career probably 20 years ago on the sales that I've got at the moment if it was just relying on the paperback and hardback. But the world has changed so much. And I think one of the things that is interesting is to wonder what it's going to be like in the next 20 years,
Yeah.
Because I'm just about young enough that I can sort of think I might be interested in what's happening in 20 years' time. Yeah. But I know you're younger than me, so 20 years from now, probably will. I'm going to be maybe writing slightly slower, but hopefully still around.
Well, apparently I'm going to be cancelled for saying I would like to go raiding and pillaging. So,
well, yeah, I think it's because I misheard you. I think you said raping and pillaging. So you're okay now. You're not cancelled now.
I'd cancel myself if I said that.
Yeah, it's okay then. I'll uncancel you. Sorry, it's fine.
Oh, thank you.
Although once it's said, I don't know if you could take it back. I think the cancellation might happen. So
raiding and pillaging.
Yeah. Well, you need to make sure if you're going to say that again, make sure that's very well pronounced. All right. So we've been talking for well over an hour and a half now. Probably both of us need to go and have a little lie down. But I've got one final question that I put up from Tracy Mayhew, which has been up there for a while, which we can end on, unless you've got anything more exciting you want to talk about. But who's your favourite author?
Matthew.
I'm your favourite author.
Oh, no. Cormac McCarthy, probably.
Oh, Cormac McCarthy.
Cormac McCarthy, I just the power of his descriptions is unlike anything I've ever seen. Things like All the Pretty Horses and Blood Meridian and The Road. I just find his books can be a bit knotty. They can be a bit heavy, and sometimes they kind of go on in a certain direction. You think, where's this going? So in terms of that, the actual sort of the narrative thread, sometimes that's a bit loose as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of his writing, in terms of the images he can put in my mind, his powers of description for me are second to none. So for that reason, I'd say Cormac McCarthy.
Good answer. So it's very difficult to pull out just one writer. But I mean, I saw somebody earlier mentioned Larry McMurtry, Lonesome Dove. That's one of my favorite books. Of course, loving westerns, and it's a huge book. And he wrote some amazing books and screenplays and all sorts. And he's incredible. So I'd have to say Larry McMurtry would be up there. Probably also, because I'm going to choose more than one, because why not? David Gemmell, mainly fantasy, but also did some historical fiction, historical fantasy stuff. David Gemmell's fantastic. I mean, my Wolf of Wessex was really my nod to the Western. It was a Western crossed with Druss from Legend by David Gemmell.
Great character, yeah. Remember,
so it's just, it was like, I thought this is, I think it was, I said it's Druss meets what's the name of the film? The Western with the girl and the guy, Cogburn. What's
True Grit.
True Grit, yeah.
Or Rooster Cogburn.
Yeah, Rooster Cogburn. So it's like it's True Grit meets Legend meets Ray Mears in the Dark Ages.
That's the stuff that made us who we are today. Those films and stories.
That's it. That's why. Yeah, that's why we are.
The Alamo. Do you remember the Alamo?
The Alamo. Yeah, there's a remake of that which I started to watch, but didn't. Wasn't great. People are making more comments, but I think we've answered a lot of questions. I think that's probably just about it. But just before we go, then, what's next? Really, after this, after Where Blood Runs Cold, which comes out next week, what's next?
Yeah, after next week, I hope you've all pre-ordered a copy.
Yeah.
So after that, I've got. Well, I'm writing Arthur, as I said, the third of the Arthurian Tales. Then I have another idea for another thriller, which I'm hoping I get the chance to write, but I have to talk to my publisher about that. I've got the video game Norse, which is coming out next year. Lancelot TV in development. So and some other TV or film stuff that's kind of going on. I do a lot of Phil Stevens and I we write pitch decks for ideas, so and then we shop them to producers and directors and things like that. So we've always got that going on, and we're writing a script for a short story that we have called Hellmouth. We're writing the feature script for that as well, which we'd very much like to make as a movie. So lots of stuff. So it's not all just writing the books for me, which is nice. I like to vary it up. Just writing, doing the same thing every day is plays havoc with my ability to sit down and concentrate. So I like to mix it up a bit. What about you?
So, well, of course.
One more time. Let's hear it.
One more time. I've got A Night of Flames coming out on the 3rd of March. So after that, of course, I've got at the end of the year, I've got this book 9 of the Benicia Chronicles, Forest of Foes, coming out. And I'm really at this point where I've decided I need to make a decision. I need to write more of those books, but I think I'm going to take some time to write a synopsis of the next Benicia Chronicles, the next Time for Swords book, and the proposal for a Western. Write all 3 synopses and then run them up the flagpole and see which one goes. See which one comes out first wins, because I have to write the first 2 anyway. So it's really whether I can convince myself and the publisher and everyone that I should write a Western, or I can write a Western. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see if it happens or not. I'm kind of scared of the idea. But... So thanks very much, and thanks for everybody for coming, and thanks to Giles, of course, for all of your time, and for everyone for all the questions. And I don't know if you heard my dog barking there. He's woken up now. I'd forgotten he was in here with me, actually. So he's obviously telling me it's time to go. So thanks very much to everyone. Thanks, Giles, for your time. Best of luck.
Really good fun. Thank you.
Yeah, and until next time. Maybe next time we can meet face to face at an event sometime, like we have done in the past.
That'd be nice.
That'd be great. So best of luck for Where Blood Runs Cold and all your other endeavours, and I hope to see the TV series. And that's it. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And have a great weekend.